I think all of our wires are hooked up properly, and I think the sound is working. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
Welcome.
good. Yes, welcome. It's Libertarian Currents. It's Tuesday, February 4th. Good to see you, Jacques.
Likewise, David. Interesting times.
Very interesting times. We've got lots to talk about. Let's get right to it.
Yes.
Okay, so how about you introduce the clip?
Well, this is a clip where Mark Carney is explaining that he's going to do away with the carbon tax and replace it with something much, much better. But play it because it is unimaginably bad.
Yeah, here we go.
But the large polluters pay. And so what happens?
But does that not ultimately trickle down?
No, because what the big companies are producing, by and large, are not products that we are consuming. There's some element of that, but by and large, a steel company, how much steel are you using these days, Todd? I mean, not as much we used. So anyway, so that's core to it. But
Okay, when I heard this, David, and I'll go back to Carney in a minute. I mean, I have been highly suspicious of the guy for a long time. But if you were to watch this for the first time, your antennas should go up immediately. Because first of all, his statement is illogical, internally incoherent. Because he said the large polluters, basically what he was saying is, well, they make stuff that nobody uses. Well, how come they're in business, right? That's the first thing. But he singled out steel. Okay. Now, I'm going to read an excerpt. Well, it's not an excerpt per se, but there's a great, great scientist at the University of Manitoba by the name of Vaclav Smil. He's been putting out books, extraordinary books. I read, I think his last one, which is How the Real World Works. Okay. So let me just read a little sort of excerpt. He says, 4 materials rank highest on the scale of necessity, forming what I have called the 4 pillars of modern civilization. This is Schmill speaking. Cement, steel, plastics, and ammonia are needed in larger quantities than are other essential inputs. The world now produces annually about 4.5 billion tons of cement, 1.8 billion tons of steel, nearly 400 million tons of plastic, and on and on and on. Okay. And he said, all of these require fossil fuels for production. Okay. So what we have here is someone who knows what he's talking about. He's basically saying that steel is one of the 4 most important pillars of society. And we have Carney, who, like, there's only 2 options here. And I cannot stress this enough to people who are listening. When you hear something like this, there's only 2 options. Either Carney is absolutely uneducated and clueless as to how the world works, or he knows better, but is lying through his teeth. Now,
He knows better, and he thinks his listeners just don't understand how the world works.
okay,
And
but
he can
but
pull the
my
wool
point,
over their eyes.
right? But my point here is neither option is remotely acceptable
Yeah.
in a prime minister. You cannot be clueless and you cannot be dishonest to the point where you're lying through people. I think that what he's hoping to do is
Let me
to
stop you there. Justin Trudeau proves both of those statements incorrect. He is clueless and he lies through his teeth.
Yes, but an or is also not acceptable, and you can't be one or the other, right? And it's even worse if you're both. But what I think Carney wants to do is he wants to bury the carbon tax with the producer, knowing full well that it's going to get passed on. But if your carbon tax is buried in the price of the steel you purchase or the cement, it's much more difficult than people seeing it itemized on their heating bill, for example, or their gas bill, or things of that nature, right? So this is when he talks about replacing it with something that works better and all that, it's absolutely not true. The man is a liar. And he's taking people for idiots, frankly. And
I
just in
think
case
that
people,
quickly, sorry.
well, I was going to say, I mean, I don't think that people are idiots, but I do believe that sometimes people, their day-to-day lives are just so busy that they don't really have the time to think about these things. And I see part of my job is to educate people to make sure that they don't get conned by a con man, because that's what he is. Now, as an aside, I recently wrote a piece on Substack about Carney. And again, I just want, the more I read about the man, the more I see him talk, the scarier it gets, because I really thought that he was better than that. But he is Justin Trudeau 2.0, only much better educated.
Mm.
And this is where I have to stress to people, don't get conned by people who have credentials, educational credential. What matters all the time is your belief system. What is it that you believe in? And, okay, so you have it on. The man is a central planner. He rages against capitalism, ignoring, of course, all the benefits that have come out of it. He's a climate alarmist, in spite of the fact that, as I mentioned in my article, anybody who would bother to read the IPCC would know that the climate alarmism is a bunch of nonsense. But everything that he's pushing for is predicated on this, where he would come in and, of course, dictate. Again, this is the mania of central planners, people who are convinced that somehow they have the knowledge to be able to substitute their own knowledge for that of millions of people, and that somehow I also point out in there that for a guy who believes in central planning, he failed miserably when he was the governor of the Bank of England, because he printed so much money that just like in Canada or the US, got hit with massive inflation, like 9.5% one year, followed to 7.5% the year after. So this is a guy who believes that he can control the world, right? He can control all the inputs, all the outputs, but he couldn't do his job regarding inflation, which anyone would argue, because it's more limited, would be easier to do. He failed on this. This man, I'm telling you, and it looks like they might as well mail it in. He's going to be the next prime minister, although he will not be elected. Will inflict unimaginable economic hardship. He is going to make Canadians poorer. Because another thing that I didn't cover in there, but just for the sake of argument, like he's talking about these wonderful green jobs. And again, for a guy who claims to be an economist, he misses the point entirely. As I have said so many times, it's not jobs that we're after, it's production, right? It's the production that allows us to have better lives. This is this idea of good jobs, right? I mean, this guy must be an absolute Keynesian, because in the Keynesian world, if you pay a guy to dig hole and pay another guy to fill the hole at the end of the day, you've somehow advanced the economy, which on the face of it is absurd, absolutely absurd. But he believes that, right? So there is a concept in the energy world called EROEI, energy return on energy invested, right? So you look at the output of energy that you get out of the energy that you have to put in to get the energy out. And fossil fuels are about 30 to 1. Pretty good. Now, the best one that we have available to us is nuclear energy, which is about 100 to 1. But of course, because of the environmentalists, we can't go there. But under ideal condition, wind and solar might be able to get you 5 to maybe 10 to 1. So when someone like Carney says we're going to get rid of fossil fuel and we're going to go to solar and solar, he's basically saying the return on the energy invested is going to drop by a factor of 3 or 6, and somehow, we're going to be richer than before. The math doesn't work. It's absurd on its face. The man is a charlatan. I cannot stress this enough. People have to be aware of the damage that this guy would do to the country.
He seems willing to inflict that damage. He knows that the results of his policies at the Bank of England, produced high inflation. He knows what's been happening in Canada's economy the past few years with out of control spending. He's been behind Justin Trudeau the whole time. He knows the results. I think that a person like this is dangerous because he's power hungry. Clearly, the way that they're conducting the current Liberal Party leadership race, he's power hungry. But I think there's something really insidious about his statement about the carbon tax here. And in the interview, briefly, he's being asked, like, what would you do about the consumer-facing carbon tax? And he's been on the record to say both that the carbon tax isn't high enough, but that the consumer carbon tax is divisive. Okay, so what he wants to do is hide the carbon tax from the consumer-facing market, let's say, and put the carbon tax, like you described, or as he himself describes, put it onto the polluters, put it on the producers of steel, and they can pay the higher carbon tax. And of course, what does that do? It raises the price of commodities. It raises the price of our goods that we use for manufacturing. And all of our infrastructure costs go up, and all of our utilities costs go up. And then, of course, how does a socialist use that? They use it to turn the population against the rich, turn the population against corporations. The corporations are charging too much. They're greedy. And then that's more power for his party. That's more power for the leader of that socialist group. I think that that's what's going on. Do you think I'm crazy?
No, I mean, I can only go by what he says, and that's bad enough. But it's entirely possible that behind closed doors, that's exactly what he's after. It wouldn't surprise me at all.
Yeah,
but just in terms of the stuff he puts out is I mean, as an aside, I don't understand how people can live like this. I mean, he made himself look like a complete moron, and for some reason doesn't seem to be bothered by it. Whereas I'd be so I would be so petrified, to have made such a stupid, ignorant statement like that.
Yeah, you would think he'd be on the record to correct it or something. Like he would have published a video talking about how, I misspoke, or no, none of that. It's just the Canadian electorate won't pay attention beyond the 24-hour news cycle. He knows it's buried. He knows that the liberal media will bury it. There's more from him.
I mean, just as an aside, if I were the Conservative, I would have that clip, and then I would have footage of all the stuff that we use every day that has steel in it. Yeah. Right. I mean, you could start with your car and your dishwasher and your dryer and your washer and your bicycle and
all around us, everything. Here's a clip. Andrew Lawton had posted this a month ago. Here we go.
Mark Carney is back from Europe.
And speaking as a European,
to continue what Justin Trudeau started.
A steady increase in the price of carbon. Carbon prices have been applied sparingly. They've been set far too low.
He even called Trudeau's carbon tax a model for others. So no matter what he calls it,
effectively a shadow carbon price, or price on pollution,
you're going to keep paying.
In some form of carbon tax.
Carbon tax Carney. He's just like Justin.
You're sneaky.
Mark Carney is back.
Yeah. Clearly, he wants to raise the price. He wants he wants taxpayers to pay more.
Yep. And all of this will have, I mean, of course, the outcome is either going to be one of two things. Either it's not going to be high enough to have any impact whatsoever on the climate, or he's going to send us back to the dark ages.
Yeah. Here's his contestant, is not his running mate. Would that be right? I don't know what to call her. Ruby Dalla, also running for the leadership of the Liberal Party, says, like, she's on fire. I like that little comment of hers. If you're happy with Trudeau, you'll be happy with Carney. And then Monica here, Trudeau was the puppet, Carney is the puppet master. I think we know that. That's what's been happening. Between Gerald Butts at Eurasia Group, Mark Carney's wife at Eurasia Group, Mark Carney, the three of them are all surrounding Trudeau and guiding every decision he's made on finance. They probably dictated the budget to Chrystia Freeland, who was a figurehead in that position, because she's clearly not qualified for the position. It's a group of insiders. I think Ruby Dalla, by the way, is realizing actually that the Liberal Party is a group of, it's managed by insiders for insiders. I don't know if you saw this little quip from her, but Mark Carney has been talking about his connections and how he's been in touch with cabinet ministers and how he's been talking with their colleagues in the United States about the tariffs. And so Ruby, running as a Liberal leader contender, I think she's got a reasonable question here. What do you think, Jacques?
Yeah, no, these are very, very. I mean, a lot of people are alarmed that he's involved so deeply, even though he hasn't been elected. Although I think in many ways it hasn't changed anything, because even if he hadn't declared, he probably would have been involved behind the scenes anyway.
Yeah. Where do we go from here regarding Mark Carney?
Well, I think we've said enough. I mean, I just hope that people can pass this on. And by the way, we haven't had a single comment. Are comments enabled?
I'll have a look at the chat. I'll put the overlay. We haven't had any comments yet. So, hey, if you're watching at X, YouTube, Rumble, or Facebook, you can comment and we'll see them. You can put questions on screen and we can have a running chat there. I do see that we've got quite a few people watching at the moment. So thanks for tuning in, everyone. But yeah, feel free to make some comments as we go. So, Jacques, let me put this on screen. There's a few things that have been catching my eye throughout these past few days. And just, I think, as we talk about Mark Carney and other current events, it's important for people to be reminded of the current state of Canada's economy. And if there's one graph that captures what's going on in our economy, this is it, in my opinion. This is the standard of living as measured by real GDP per capita. And we're just, as a country, we've fallen so far behind. This graph doesn't take into account inflation, by the way. So when we do account for inflation, our standard of living has decreased. Like, we're below that dotted line.
Well, I can only repeat what I've said before. I'm currently involved in a startup. I am finding the hard way how absolutely difficult it is to come to market with anything in this country. The decision makers are living in a fantasy world where they think that wealth just happens, right? It spontaneously materializes out of nothing instead of being the result of entrepreneurs, because the hurdles, the regulations are absolutely massive. And I've always had a great deal of admiration for entrepreneurs, but it's been multiplied many, many times since I'm involved, because it is unimaginable for I suppose in many ways there's nothing wrong with people aspiring to steady, guaranteed jobs or whatever, but I think the message has to go out that we need people who will create wealth and who are taking risks. And because, I mean, that's what I wrote another piece on Substack about that, where I described the government as the ultimate um, scavenger, right?
Mhm.
Waiting for the kill to take place. And by the kill, I mean by the entrepreneur who brings to market something that's successful. And once you're successful, boom, the government swoops in to take a large component of your success. But of course, the government is not by your side by the time, I mean, during the long hours that you put in and the difficulties you encounter. I mean, many people have told us, like me and my colleagues, you guys are nuts to try this in Canada. Go to the US. It's much easier. We've heard this over and over again. So to go back to your graph, I mean, when we impede one of the most wealth producing element, which is oil and gas in Alberta, right? And when you decap them repeatedly, I mean, you are impairing the ability of the country, um, again, to create wealth. I mean, you look at latest employment figures where, astonishingly to me, once again, you have a bunch of economists who really don't understand how the economy works, where there was one instance a couple of months ago where I think the net creation for the month had been like 1,000, and the guy said, "Well, it's not great, but it's not like we lost anything, except if you scratch below the surface, what you found was something like 42,000 jobs have been created at the so-called government,
Yeah.
or so-called created at the government, and while 41,000 jobs have been lost in the private sector." I mean, anybody who claims to be an economist who thinks there's nothing wrong with that ought to return his degree, because those are appalling numbers. It's the private sector that creates the wealth.
It's
So,
as you said earlier, if the government hires someone to dig a hole and someone else to fill that hole, they think that the economy has improved somehow. Two more people have jobs.
yeah. I mean, when you get conned into thinking that it's jobs that matter instead of production, it can lead you to very, very dark places where you start doing asinine things that don't add anything at all to the economy. I mean, the regulation, the taxation. I mean, another thing that happens, of course, and again, people don't see this, but when you have really bright people with great ideas, we lose them to the US. Very
Yeah.
few people decide to stay in this country to do that because, again, the climate is easier in the US. So no, these graphs are not surprising at all, because it's even worse. It's been a lot worse under Trudeau.
But maybe things are about to change, Jacques. Maybe there's optimism on the horizon, a silver cloud on this lining. We're seeing all of a sudden, according to Melissa Chen here, she says, gotta hand it to the Canadians. Trump's tariffs managed to turn an entire country of milquetoast liberals whose national pastime is apologizing into ardent nationalists in just one day. Amazing. All of a sudden, all these liberal progressives are nationalists.
Well, um, maybe I'm dealing in conspiracy theory, but by the way, I announced today that I got my papers
I saw that. Yeah,
approved,
congratulations.
right? So I will be running in the Ontario election, but there is nothing better for a politician to be able to go to the polls with a us versus them type of attitude, because it
Yeah.
takes the focus away from the real problems. Because in Ontario, as you know, because you were here until recently,
Yeah.
education, healthcare, the economy in general, I mean, it's all down the toilet, right? And Ford would much rather run against Trump
Yeah.
and the tariffs than trying to defend his poor record. Well, it's the same thing with the Liberals. I mean, talk about a godsend in many ways to be able to say, boy, rah, rah, Canada, and we're going to really take this guy on.
Yeah.
And by the way, now we've taken your attention away from the things that matter, such as the GDP per capita.
Yeah. Rah Rah Canada says all these people, I'm going to pull up a news article. This is a reminder that, so yeah, rah Canada. I'm old enough to remember 4 years ago, 2 years ago, when people in Edmonton, Vancouver, Ottawa, they were being pulled over. Their vehicle was pulled over, and they were charged with mischief for flying the Canadian flag. Rah Canada, the same people who cheered when Canadians were pulled over, given a fine for flying the Canadian flag. Here's an article I found earlier today. This is like, people had to go on a whole campaign to reinvigorate their version of the Canadian flag and have please fly the Canadian flag this Canada Day this year. Don't worry about those freedom fighters and the fact that they tainted the Canadian flag with their cause. No, we're nationalists now. We're patriots now. Like, these people drape themselves in the flag when it's convenient, and I just find this very strange that we have this turn. All of a sudden, there's a movement, a nationalist movement among these progressives. Suddenly, they're all concerned about freedom when Trump starts to joke about Canada being annexed and turned into a 51st state. Do you know Sue Ann Levy? I found this from her. She was commenting on this issue. I've never been so embarrassed, she says, as I am with my fellow Canadians who have suddenly discovered patriotism and jingoism, ranting and raving like spoiled children who are entitled to their entitlements. Instead of screaming, "Buy Canadian," why don't we scream, "Trudeau, bring back Parliament"?
Yeah. Valid point. Valid point.
Yeah.
I mean, we see this all the time. I mean, people are internally inconsistent, incoherent.
Yeah.
Right? Like, at one time, it's perfectly fine to be nationalistic, and other times it's no, you have to apologize for it.
Yeah. We're colonizers, but we have intermittent bouts of frantic patriotism.
Yeah.
Like, it's so. J.J. McCullough pointed out something interesting here. Because people are talking about diversifying the economy and finding new trading partners, and he often has a good perspective. He's reminding us Canada will not diversify, he says, and become some new global power. This has been tried a million times. It never works. Countries grow rich by exploiting their comparative advantage, and Canada's its closeness with the U.S. Means that we have a poorer Canada, period.
Well, looks like JJ has actually read some economics. Comparative advantage. Most people don't understand that. I mean, certainly not Trudeau.
Well, sorry, I should be clear. I didn't read that very clearly, but he says our comparative advantage is our closeness to the U.S. market. We have this extreme privilege of being able to trade so openly with the United States. And if people want to lose that or denigrate it, that's a loss for Canada. I just don't understand how people are cheering on, booing each other's hockey teams. That's happening now too.
Now, one of the things that I find kind of amazing in all this is that there's all kinds of proposal that, we should do this and we should diversify and, we should start making this, whatever this is, right? Instead of importing it from the US. And strangely enough, people never ask themselves, well, why is it that we haven't done so far?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, there's got to be a absence of coercion and government involvement, which of course sometimes is behind the scene. But again, in a free market, things evolve because the two participants benefit from the exchange. So if we're not making X, presumably it's because we're better off making Y while importing X from the US, right? There's a natural set of reasons why these things are taking place. And again, the central planners now who think that, oh boy, I've got to figure it. I have got it figured out. Like I know absolutely nothing as to why things are the way they are, but boy, I've got a solution to it.
Yeah.
I mean, the hubris of these people just.
So that's related to, I found this comment from, I don't know this person, David Zhao. For all the people who said, who are saying, what could Canada have done? Here's a few things we could have done. Like to your question, why have these things not been done in the past 9, 10 years or decades? 10 years ago, he said we could have diversified the economy. We could have permit more drilling, build more pipelines. 1 year ago, instead of antagonizing Trump at every chance, we could have kept our opinions out of the US election. 2 months ago, announced a strict crackdown on fentanyl and the border. Make it an absolute priority. 30 days ago, keep Parliament open instead of proroguing. Like there's a ton of things we could have done.
Well, I want to emphasize here what you said a year ago.
Yeah.
Once again, I'm not quite sure why it has evolved this way, but it amazes me how people on the left, like the Trudeaus of the world, have appropriated for themselves the moral high ground. Like, I don't know if it's because they're in an echo chamber and never hear a different point of view, but they have anointed themselves as, the guardians of morality.
Yeah.
And then they having anointed themselves, they go on and lecture, demonize anybody who's not like them, right? So it's very, very clear that Trudeau and Liberals in general, I mean, have taken every shot at Trump that they could. And as I said recently, surely one of the elements of being the leader of a country is that you ought to exercise some diplomacy, right? You may think that he's a terrible guy, but you keep your opinion, in the private sphere. You don't start insulting the guy every chance. I mean, we started behind the 8 ball with Trump, and as I stated recently, I sure hope that the guy is not so vindictive as wanting to take it out on the average Canadian who had nothing to do with Trudeau's misbehavior, right? I mean, if somehow he wants to punish Trudeau, then he ought to find a way to do it personally, not take it out on the rest of the country. I mean,
Trump said in an interview yesterday something about, he was asked about the Canadian tariffs, and he said something like, the leadership there, they're not doing a very good job. I like Canadians. Canadians are good people, but the leadership is like, Trump is making a distinction there. But, Trudeau not only criticized Trump directly, but directly criticized half of the American population that voted for Trump. He called himself a feminist, and he was so disappointed that the American people didn't choose a woman for president. Meanwhile, of course, the Liberal Party is about to anoint another white male.
Yeah, no, I know.
Like hold a mirror to yourself, buddy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So it's very. I mean, again, people on the left can't stand Danielle Smith. I mean, my beef with her is that she calls herself a libertarian, and she's no libertarian, but she has gone about this with diplomacy, and it looks like it's paying off. I mean, they seem to be listening to her more than they're listening to Trudeau. Well,
Trudeau just stole all of her ideas, and yesterday promised Danielle's platform to Donald Trump to get the tariffs deferred.
Right. Well,
she went online last week and said we need a border czar, and we should immediately do X, Y, and Z. And so that's essentially the deal that Trudeau put forward yesterday. Was it yesterday? Wow, there's so many things happening.
Yeah.
So fast.
Now, for the benefit of the people who listen here, I would just like to take a moment to talk about what our platform is regarding, free trade, because it's obviously very important. You know, our platform states very nicely that if your agreement, if your free trade agreement is longer than a single sentence, then you don't have free trade, you have managed trade. And truer words have never been spoken, because when you look at the, what does Trump call it? I'm talking the Mexico, U.S., Canada. I mean, he's got an acronym that.
Yeah.
Anyway,
yeah, I'll look it up.
Right. I mean, this thing goes on for thousands of pages, right? I mean, so clearly it has nothing to do with free trade. It's all managed trade.
USMCA.
Right. Our position is we have no tariffs. We have no restrictions of any kind. You want to come and you know, we are open for business, and we certainly hope that you're going to return, you know, the favor. End of story. Pretty simple, single sentence, and you're done. So of course, you know, a lot of people have asked me, what if you were prime minister tomorrow, what would you do? And I said, well, the first thing I would not do is to retaliate in any way. I would go to the diplomatic route, and I would remind Trump, because for all his faults, he is not a stupid man. In fact, I think he's quite bright. And I would point out to him, and here, let me step back for a minute and maybe convey to people something that often helps me understand economics better. If you take money out, because money, I think, confuses a lot of people. I mean, certainly it's confused Trudeau, who thinks that printing money is equal to wealth. It's not the case at all. But if you step back and you imagine that we are now in a world of barter or you know, basically trading. And again, let's leave for a moment aside the nationhood, and it's just you and me, David. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And you are a baker, and I'm a shoemaker. Okay. Now, if I want to have some bread, what is the only way, short of charity, for me to get bread from you?
Trade.
First, I have to produce, right?
Sure.
I have to produce something that you want so that I can come to you and say, I will trade you a pair of shoes for your bread, right? And vice versa, right? What is the only way you can get shoes? It's by producing bread so that you have something to trade. So I would simply, and the same happens at the nation state, right? Because now I could go to Trump and say, all right, if you want to slap tariffs on our product, I simply want to point out to you that the only way we can purchase for your exports, right, is through imports. So if you're now going to limit how much I can trade with you, like how much, because your people are going to purchase less, right? So now I have less to trade with, which means that I have less to get from you. So if he's keen, of course, on supporting his export market, then he would understand that getting rid of the tariffs is the way to go.
If he values Canada as an export market.
Yes, right.
So, but
Because
he might be thinking that he could direct his export market to other countries and sell elsewhere. That he might not need that loaf of bread from you because he can get it elsewhere and sell his shoes there.
Well, you know, no, that's true. But my point is that, again, it's in order to get something from somebody, you better produce first, right? And if you produce and somebody refuses to take it, well, that's fine. But then you're not in a position to trade and get what they've produced.
Right. Yeah. But this is where I've found the rhetoric really weird in the past week or two among liberals and other progressives, you know, the Toronto Star. It's like they think that the United States should want to trade with Canada just because we're nice people or something. Like we have things you need, so you should trade with us and without tariffs. They forget that the U.S. can go elsewhere to get a lot of what Canada produces. I mean, I think there's some difficulty in retooling their oil refineries and suddenly going to another market to buy crude oil. I mean, there's obviously some difficulty, but in so many other aspects, they can produce their own without us. They can buy elsewhere, or they can import from other countries rather than Canada. Canada's not in, like, we are in a very privileged position having such a peaceful border with that country and a long history of great trade relationship. It's maddening to me that our current Liberal government is willing to, vilify the people of that country and demonize the president of that country just to save face. Like, the Trudeau went online and lectured. Like, stop the lecture. This isn't about morality. It's about commerce, as far as I can tell.
Well, that's exactly what it is. And people, if it weren't for the government, the governments getting involved here, people would trade. I mean, people trade all the time without interference from people. From their overlords, as it were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, here's an example of that. Anita Anand. Okay, she went online the other day. She said, "We will not stand idly by when our nation is being needlessly and unfairly targeted. We will defend Canadian interests and jobs. These countermeasures have one goal: to protect and defend Canada's interests, consumers, workers, and businesses." And this, of course, she's retweeting Justin Trudeau. Tamara Leach had a great response to this. You did stand idly by, she says. For 9 years, you've stood idly by, and that's why we're in the current situation. Stood idly by when the drugs overtook our streets, when Canadians were forced to start living in tent cities. Like, the economy in Canada is so weak right now. I don't know how any Liberal thinks that we're going to win some sort of tariff war or trade war with the United States. It's just absurd. Stood idly by while the cost of living went through the roof, sending families to food banks. You stood idly by as a scandal after scandal unfolded, when peaceful protesters had their bank accounts frozen and were beaten in the streets of Ottawa. She goes on, and like, it's quite a powerful post to remind of the chaos that the Liberal government has produced.
By the way, again, talk about inconsistency. You know that we have massive inter-provincial barriers in this country.
Yeah, terrible.
And the numbers are staggering. I mean, I have no way to verify this, but the number that I saw yesterday was at least equal to the damage that the tariffs on Canadian product would do. And yet, nobody cared, or nobody cares, I guess. I mean, it's this is a terrible, terrible thing. Well, you haven't done anything about a state of affair that's gone on for decades. It's so bizarre.
Yeah, there's a point here from Bruce Pardy, a tweet about that. Canadian hand-wringing about how tariffs hurt both sides is pretty rich, coming from a country that has tariff-like trade restrictions between its own provinces.
Yeah, exactly. Right? I mean, like, people who are up in arms and yet did nothing about this should be completely disregarded. I mean, to me, they have zero credibility to comment on this.
Yeah. Here's an interesting take about tariffs. Billboard Chris, I think tariffs are bad because I think taxes are bad, and that's what tariffs are.
Well,
having said that, if the U.S. want to do what they want, they can. Americans elected Trump knowing that he likes tariffs. It was part of his platform, the whole election campaign.
I mean, people ought to stop for a minute, right? Like, when they're saying, "Well, and unfortunately, Trump has contributed to this complete misunderstanding, right? I mean, you keep saying that, tariffs are great because the Chinese are going to pay, or the Canadians are going to pay, and the Mexican. I mean, a tariff is like a sales tax on imports, right? So who pays a sales tax? Well, it's the consumer. So he's been misleading his own people. Now, this is not.
Only if you're right, except he's also of the opinion that they can be self-sustaining, that the country can produce more of its own and buy America. Okay, so you're right, so long as they require the import.
Yes, but I think that, I mean, this is very complicated, but the fact that people were trading right now, right? And I'm assuming here that there's no coercion or government involvement. It's because it's beneficial to do so, right? When he says, "Well, we're going to start," let me give you an example.
Sure.
When you, like, for a long time, like, as you know, a lot of manufacturing is now being done in China, right? Manufacturing that used to be done here or in the U.S. is now done in China. And the argument has always been, well, Chinese is slave labor, or they don't get paid much, and our workers here can't compete. Interestingly enough, when you talk to CEOs of these companies, they will tell you that while it is an element, although people in North America tend to be more productive, right? So it's not entirely clear that because they get paid more, it's a loss. But to a person, they will tell you the reason we went to China is because it's so much easier. Like, once again, we go back to rules and regulations
Permits, regulations.
and red tape and taxes and on and on and on, right? So if Trump wants to believe that he can repatriate manufacturing to the US because he's now no longer importing from Canada, although maybe that's a poor example because I just mentioned China, but I'm using this as an example, right? Where you say, well, like, in a vacuum, right? We're going to assume that we can magically start doing it here. And the question you should ask is, why were you not doing it here in the first place? Like, is he going to abolish all the regulations and red tape or whatever that made it difficult to operate in the US? I mean, if he doesn't ask that,
Well, he intends to. I mean, that's what Doge is all about: deregulating and cutting red tape.
And again, I mean, you talk about that difference between Canada and the US. If they pull it off, we are going to be a basket case compared to the US. Absolutely.
That's right.
Like, we need something to do. I mean, something equivalent here.
Yeah, we need some basics. Like Paige, I don't know this person, Paige McPherson. Booing your neighbor's national anthem is something, but have you tried significantly reducing taxes and eliminating interprovincial trade barriers and ending supply management and slashing the regulations, preventing pipelines? And she's saying what you are there. Like, we have to rethink.
Paige, by the way, Paige, I believe, is the it's kind of the education guru at, I think, the Fraser Institute.
Oh, well, we are following her. Great. Hi, Paige. Yeah. So that was a good take. We need to reduce trade barriers. What do you think is? I saw this. I have to show you. It turns out that Liberal members of Parliament suddenly realize that gun crime in Canada is caused by smuggled, illegally attained guns, not legally purchased firearms of hunters and shooters in Canada. Here, have a look at this. So,
really?
Yeah. So Mark Garrettson, let's hope he doesn't win his seat in the next election. He's 90% of gun crimes in Ontario are linked to weapons from the USA. Dude, that's what we've been telling you for 9 years. Like, all these gun control measures to clamp down on well-meaning, law-abiding citizens. He finally realizes that smuggled guns are the cause.
He's bringing it up because it now serves his narrative.
That's right.
He completely ignored it while going after law-abiding gun owners in this country.
Yeah. So Tracy Wilson, she says, like, hey, wait a minute. After 9 years of gun control bills, and the Liberal Party finally admits that we aren't the problem. They should have targeted illicit smuggling instead. Isn't that something?
I don't know if you can answer this, but I am actually quite puzzled about this idea that you should police what comes out of your country. Like, I thought the whole idea was to police borders to prevent things from coming in your country. I mean, the fact that gun crimes that guns are illegal, guns are brought in from the U.S. I mean, shouldn't that be the Canadian border officers' job to stop from coming in?
I agree.
What does the U.S. have? I mean, and vice versa with fentanyl. I mean, if Trump has a problem with fentanyl coming in from Canada, I mean, doesn't he have border people to do that? Like, how? Like, I don't understand this idea that you should control what leaves your country.
Well, okay. I'll play devil's advocate because I'm not sure where I stand on the issue. I have mixed feelings on this, but I think the argument could be made that there's a great cost to the country that needs to defend itself, and that cost shouldn't be bared by that country. Like, if you're smashing my windows, Jacques, yeah, I need to protect my property, but who should pay for the window?
Right. Okay. I mean,
remember 6 years ago, or when was it, 8 years ago, he said they're going to build a wall at the southern border and Mexico will pay for it. Like, everyone thought that was absurd, but like, if Mexico isn't doing enough, and if Canada isn't doing enough to prevent contraband from leaving our country into the US, that's not different than we're standing at the edge of the country smashing their windows. Shouldn't we pay to repair their window? I don't know.
Well, it would certainly switch things on its head completely, because when I travel to the U.S., I don't speak to some Canadian border officer. I mean, they let me leave. It's the U.S. people who are the entry points.
Yeah. Although I agree, but that's at a controlled border crossing.
Yeah.
Let's say. So the assumption is that you're already abiding the law and respecting the passport, respecting the crossing. But here's a piece of information that I think is really important to the conversation, and that is, so Anthony Furey, I don't think that he would state this without having some corroborating information. Like, he knows people on the police force. He might be privy to some information that we're not. But he says the RCMP knows the location of the fentanyl super labs that are poisoning our country and exporting to the US. Shouldn't it be our cost to bear then to shut down those fentanyl labs? We know where they're located. Why hasn't the RCMP raided those buildings and shut down those labs?
I will say that, again, in terms of antagonizing people you negotiate with and all that, I mean, you can certainly start doing things to, calm them down and try to. I mean, as an aside, for example, I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that we have been taking an enormous free ride in terms of the defense of this country, right? And Trump has been calling us out on this for years, right? I mean,
yeah.
Again, leaving aside, the benefits or not of tariffs and what have you. I mean, strictly speaking, from an honorable point of view, you really ought to do the best you can to defend yourself and not having to depend on somebody else. But if someone comes along and said, "Look, you're really starting to cheese me off here because you're like it's a form of emotional blackmail, right? Because you're saying, well, yeah, we like you guys and we don't want you to get run over, and plus, I mean, we don't want the Russians to come after us through you, so we're going to come and defend you, I think is it's a deplorable attitude on the part of Canadian governments, many Canadian governments, right? So to say, well, you know what, Donald, you're right. We haven't been doing our part in terms of defending the country, and we're going to start doing a better job. To me, that would be the same thing here. I mean, why antagonize the guy by not making sure that these super labs stay here?
Stay here or shut down. Like it would be good for Canadians if they shut down, and it would be good for Canadians if we had a stronger secure border, and it would be better for Canadians if we had a freer market with less regulation. And it would be better for Canadians if we had a strong North America security. Here's another from Anthony Fury. He followed up. He says White House knows that Mexican cartels are now involved in the Canadian fentanyl production, a fact that's been largely hidden from the Canadian public. And he wrote a column all about it. Like, again, I don't think Anthony Fury is like he's a respected journalist. He's not going to publish this stuff without some sort of source.
What's the date on this? Because I get the National Post out.
This is February 3rd. Okay, the date of the actual article was February 3rd. Yesterday.
Wow.
Yeah.
I missed it. Okay, I'm going to have to read that because it's very, very intriguing.
So people have said that it's a trade war and it's not about the fentanyl but every time Donald Trump is asked about it, it's about the fentanyl. It's about the illegal immigration and it's about securing the border. It's about the banks. So I think it's simple. He wants a freer market within North America, and he wants a secure North America. He doesn't want to have to worry that north of his country is some sort of, haven for cartels to operate. But that's what we have. We have cartels operating here.
Yeah, well, I can only imagine what the conversations have been between him and Trudeau, because Trudeau probably tried to lecture him every single time instead of listening to him.
Yeah. Michelle Rempel Garner had an interesting take about that. Oh, I'll put that here. She said, if I were a fly on the wall in the Prime Minister's office lately, well, wait, he's not in the office. He's just governing the country from, I don't know, he's calling it in from his bedroom, I guess, from his cottage. But she posits that Trudeau and all the sycophants around him want the trade war. They don't want to secure the border. They want the chaos. Here's an interesting idea. Andrew Perez posted that the Trump tariff and the resulting Canada-US trade war might just be the black swan event that resuscitates the federal liberal fortunes, allowing the party to hold Pierre Poilievre's Conservatives to a minority. Many will call me crazy, but these are truly unprecedented. He's suggesting that this bodes well for the Liberals if it's a trade war, if it's a tariff war. And so they're making it into that.
Well, it's like I said with Doug Ford, right? I mean, this is a godsend for the Liberals because now people are no longer focused on the mess they've made, right? It's all us against them.
And that's why they're keeping Parliament closed.
Yeah.
Right? We have basic dictatorship as of, well, depends how far back you want to go, but clearly we don't have a Parliament right now, and we don't have a government with a mandate. So we're being ruled by a rogue regime. The speech the other night from Trudeau, I thought this was an interesting take. The speech was a Rorschach test. Those of you that did not hear the part about Trudeau refusing to convene Parliament are of the insufficiently critical of government sort. Yeah, that's the one thing I took away from Trudeau's speech the other day is he has refused to reopen Parliament.
Yep.
He'll work unilaterally, and all this talk of Team Canada means Team Canada is the group of insiders that he can work closely with for the next indeterminate period. Here's another take on not reopening Parliament. Oh, here's the clip, actually. I'll play the clip.
To pass a bill to help Canadian workers and end prorogation?
As you can see from our strong response package, as we spoke about with premiers this afternoon and have for many weeks, we have the tools to be able to support Canadians through this challenging time as it stands. This is a moment for Canadians to pull together, including Canadians of all different political parties. This is a moment.
Gee, do we have a mechanism where all Canadians from all political parties can be represented?
I'll tell you, what do we have, about 5 weeks to go before we never have to listen to this guy again?
I hope. But then we're going to listen to the next idiot.
Oh, I know, but 9 years of this vacuous man has been enough for me.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, so Parliament won't be recalled. I guess we live in a basic dictatorship. Megan Murphy. This person had an interesting take. She has met Trudeau personally. She knows him. He's manufactured this crisis, or at least allowed it to happen intentionally, to screw Canadians in exchange for more power. Please stop falling for his manipulations. Everything he does is an ego trip. At what point has he ever done what's best for the country?
Well, this is where, I have a slightly different take, and it's more in terms of, I'm assuming, Daniel Smith has spoken to Trump. She could at the very least be a conduit for Poilievre. But if I were the Conservatives, one of the things I would have done is make a call to Trump and say, right now, you are increasing the odds that they are going to use this as a justification, because constitutionally, we don't have to go to the polls until October of 2026, right? Like it's simply a matter of culture and convention that we go to the polls after 4 years, right? But they wouldn't be breaking the law if they extended it for 5 years. And all they need, I think, is an excuse to do so. So if he went to, if they had gone to Trump and said, look, can you delay this until we have a new election? And by the way, the incoming government is going to be a lot more sympathetic to, or in terms of belief, much closer to you than the eco nut jobs that we have right now.
Well, I think Pierre Poilievre has been saying such things publicly. Like, he seems to be a man of protocol. He respects protocol. He's not able to talk to the President of the United States in an official capacity, so he's just not going to. But publicly, he'll state things like I'd rather have a win-win. I'd rather have thriving economy for both countries. Like he has said such things, but he's had to walk a fine line, you might say, to not appear that he's cozying up, because I don't think the Canadian voters are going to reward any politician for cozying up to Donald Trump at this time.
No, but he could do it through back channels.
Well, possibly, and maybe they are. Maybe they're doing such things. But like, here's the one politician that has been accused repeatedly of cozying up. Right, Daniel Smith was like just berated by media for the past month, and but everything she suggested is exactly what Justin Trudeau put forward this week, and it was everything that Daniel Smith suggested that caused the President of the United States to defer the tariffs. Like, good on Daniel Smith. She's working for Canadians. And maybe through back channels to, prior to the inauguration, but since then, I think things have to be on above board and official channels.
All right.
So interesting. How about we wrap up? I've got a couple of last things I'd like to share with you, Jacques.
Yep.
So Justin Trudeau says he's going to, oh, let me zoom in there, sorry. New choppers, technology and personnel, enhanced coordination with American partners. They're going to stop the flow of fentanyl. They're going to name the cartels as terrorists. They're going to increase border patrol. Here's a good question, though. What happens when we catch these people? We still have this catch and release bail system, right? Like everything Trudeau promised is going to get screwed up somehow. Who's going to be the fentanyl czar? He's going to appoint like Sean Fraser, the guy that screwed up the immigration file or the housing file. Like, who's going to get appointed to that role? Certainly, it's going to be a Liberal insider, some sort of Trudeau Foundation donor. And I don't trust that they're going to actually take the job seriously or able to have the competence to do it. What do you think? Any hope? Any optimism for Trudeau's plan?
Well, on one hand, I would say that they are clearly unwillingly, I would gather, but doing things that need to be done because of the threat that Trump has brought about. Made them realize that, boy, the country could pay a very severe price for their ideology. And as I said, very likely unwillingly. I mean, if they were willing, they would have done it a long time ago. But
no, Trump has dragged Trudeau kicking and screaming to implement conservative policies.
Yeah. So that's one thing. But I mean, we clearly need a change of government in this country. I mean, we need. I mean, what's happening in the U.S. is so refreshing, right? Like a hard move away from wokeism and from DEI and what I mean, that needs to happen in this country as well. And as long as he's there, it's not going to. It's only going to be at the margin where Trump is pushing him. But we need law and order back in this country badly. I mean, this catch and release stuff is, it's funny terrible. Because, as a libertarian, I quite often get accused that, it would be chaos, blah, blah, blah. But I mean, the one thing that we do believe in is the non-aggression principle. And we do believe that if it gets violated, that people ought to be punished. I mean, I certainly would have no qualms at all in coming down hard on people who violate the non-aggression principle. But we don't even do that. I mean, in this country, it's a complete joke.
Yeah.
I mean,
we go after.
What did I see recently where, like it was absurd. I mean, in the length of time you could be sent to jail for something that did not violate the non-aggression principle. Like it might have been pronouns or I can forget exactly what it was, but
life in prison. In the Canadian life in prison, the Canadian law right now, if you're found to have conducted a crime and it was hate motivated, like you misgendered somebody, life in prison is the maximum sentence.
Okay. I mean, it could have been that one, but the thing is, you can now go to jail for a much longer period of time for for breaking some woke code than to do physical harm to people. It's absurd. Absolutely absurd. It's black is white and up is down. And
so to that point, there's a few things that I'm watching in the news, kind of just things I'm paying attention to. For example, the Democracy Fund noticed by the Hogue report, which was it was the recent report published regarding the investigation into foreign interference in our elections, right?
Yeah, I mean, didn't you see that? Didn't you think it was weird?
Yeah.
I mean, it was so at odds with that parliamentary committee.
Yeah.
Like I thought,
nothing to see here.
I
Nothing to
know.
see here. But the Democracy Fund found this little hidden gem in there that the Hogue report actually recommends more surveillance and more censorship as a response to foreign interference. So that's interesting. I'm going to be watching that news. Here's another one I'm watching. The Epoch Times reported today that the staff at Perlator. So a few months ago, it was ruled that the vaccine mandate was illegal in their context, and just today, that was announced that the Perlator, the company, will have to hire them back, and there's payment to be made as well. This isn't the right article. I'm sorry, I have the wrong link at the moment, but they were unjustly terminated, and therefore back pay is owed to them. I'm watching that news, and the last one I have, Jack, is news from the Canadian Constitution Foundation. The Emergencies Act appeal took place today. The government is upset that the court found that the Emergencies Act was unconstitutional.
Yep.
And so because they were upset, they appealed the decision, and that happened this morning. So I'll check into this and find out from Christine Van Geyn what the result of that hearing was. Well, I don't know, hearing or trial or whatever they call it. But we don't know the result yet. But it was in the court today.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm surprised that, but I was surprised. I mean, I saw that earlier. I was surprised that it went to the court so quickly, because I was not expecting it to happen until after the election in October. So this is this has been fast tracked, I think.
I don't know that it was fast tracked. I mean, this is the appeal.
I know, but like I remember listening to her on some kind of podcast, might have been with Peterson or anyway, and I think her guess at the time was that it wouldn't happen until after the election and this was assuming it would take place in October.
Oh, I see. Well, maybe movement. I mean, it's all chess pieces, right? Moves and counter moves. And so our current government might have wanted to orchestrate this because they know the outcome. And good news. We were right. We were justified in the Emergencies Act. I mean, maybe that's what they're going to try and argue leading up to the next election. Who knows? Well, I'm going to have to exit soon, Jack. I've got.
No, and I got to go as well. So, but
Yeah.
this has been very good. Very good.
I'm going to look into why we didn't get any comments. Maybe there was some sort of technical glitch regarding commenting on some of the platforms. But for those of you that tuned in, thanks very much. Good to hear from you. Leave a comment and like and share and subscribe and tickle the algorithms. And Jacques, it's been good to talk with you.
But let me actually just finish, and I'm going to look back to Carney very quickly. I've had the pleasure and the delight over the last couple of weeks to vet some of our candidates for the next federal election. Salt of the earth people have been talking. Very, very impressed. And, going back to what I said earlier, I don't think that any of them would be able to claim to have the pedigree that Carney has in terms of, PhDs and whatever. But I would turn the governance of the country to these people over Carney anytime, because these people get it, right? Like in terms of their belief system, they are not a bunch of, Carney is a complete nut job. And as I said, he's going to do terrible damage to the country if he's given a chance, but these people get it. So it's been a very pleasant experience, and it goes on. So
Salt of the earth. I think that means Mark Carney is not salt of the earth. I think he's been aloof and lived in such a privileged life for so long that he doesn't understand the day-to-day reality.
I'll keep it sanitary. He's the poop of the earth.
Yeah. Well, on that note, Jacques, have a great evening.
And you.
Yeah. Bye for now.
Bye.